Question 11. Feathers recently taken from seabirds stuffed and preserved in the 1880s have been found to contain only half as much mercury as feathers recently taken from living birds of the same species. Since mercury that accumulates in a seabird's feathers as the feathers grow is derived from the fish eaten by the bird, these results indicate that mercury levels in saltwater fish are higher now than they were 100 years ago. All right, argument or set of facts. Clearly, we have an argument. The conclusion is the last part of the last sentence, that these results indicate that mercury levels in saltwater fish are higher now than they were 100 years ago. And how do we know that? Well, we took these feathers from seabirds that were stuffed and preserved in the 1880s, compared them with feathers from living birds of the same species, and the mercury in the feathers from the 1880s was half that of the mercury in the feathers of the birds today. And since the mercury that accumulates is derived from the fish eaten by the bird, these results indicate that the mercury levels in saltwater fish are higher now than they were 100 years ago. So you notice we have a cause and effect argument. What is the effect that the author is trying to explain? And again, you notice what they told us was that in the 1880s, compared with today, the mercury in the 1880s was half what it was today. So if today it was X, then in the 1880s it was half that, or 1/2 X. And again, this is mercury in feathers. So the observed effect is this difference in mercury. So the fact that today we have X amount of mercury, but in the 1880s we had only half of that. And what is the author's proposed cause for this observed effect? And you notice it is that the mercury levels in saltwater fish are higher. All right, so now that we have a clear understanding of this argument, let's proceed to the question stem. The argument depends on assuming that. Depends on assuming that this is a strengthen with necessary premise question. So not only must the answer choice strengthen this argument, it is also necessary to the conclusion in the passage so that without it, the argument would be destroyed. Again, coming from the definition of a necessary premise. So let's take a look now at A. The proportion of a seabird's diet consisting of fish was not as high on average in the 1880s as it is today. And you notice that A actually weakens this argument by pointing out an alternate cause. It's not that the mercury levels are higher in saltwater fish today, but rather that birds today eat more fish than birds did in the 1880s. So A, alternate cause of eating more fish, so weakens the argument. Again, we're looking to strengthen, and not only strengthen, but strengthen with a necessary premise. B, the amount of mercury in a saltwater fish depends on the amount of pollution in the ocean habitat of the fish. And again, you notice B is completely irrelevant. This argument is not about pollution. So B would be out. Does not strengthen. Which brings me to C. Mercury derived from fish is essential for the normal growth of a seabird's feathers. And again, you notice that is completely irrelevant. This is not about the normal growth of these feathers. This is about the amount of mercury in the feathers. So C clearly does not strengthen, and C is out. Which brings me to D. The stuffed seabirds whose feathers were tested for mercury were not fully grown. And you notice D, just like A, weakens this argument with an alternate cause. It's not that the mercury level in fish is higher today than it was in the 1880s. The reason that we see this difference in mercury level is that the feathers of the birds from the 1880s that we're looking at, that were preserved, were from birds that were not fully grown. So you notice that weakens this argument, so D is out, which brings us process of elimination to E, which clearly must be the correct answer. The process used to preserve birds in the 1880s did not substantially decrease the amount of mercury in the bird's feathers, and you notice that clearly strengthens this argument. If the process used to preserve the birds did not substantially decrease the amount of mercury, well, that rules out a possible alternate cause, that this process decreased the mercury, which strengthens the argument that it's the higher levels of mercury in today's fish. But now let's see, is that necessary to this argument? So the process used to preserve birds in the 1880s did not substantially decrease the amount of mercury, would become the process used to preserve birds in the 1880s did substantially decrease the amount of mercury in the bird's feathers. And you notice that when you negate E, it destroys the argument, which proves that E is not only strengthening, but also necessary, and therefore E would be the correct answer.